So Apple just finished up their Let Loose event, and in this video I want to recap everything they announced because even though we expected the new iPad Air and new iPad Pros, it's finally amazing to see exactly what Apple's been working on over the last 2 years. So without further ado, let's recap this Let Loose event, and I'm extremely excited to the point where I already ordered my iPad Pro and iPad Air. Let's get into it. So since Apple started talking about the iPad Air first and foremost, that's exactly what we're going to do. So the new iPad Air now comes in 2 different sizes. You now have the 11-inch, which we've had for a while now, but now we have a brand new 13-inch. And it's kind of funny because we originally thought it would be a 12.9-inch, but Apple is giving us a true 13-inch iPad Air. So that is great to see because we get a little bit extra screen real estate, but the bezels seem to be about the same size as the old iPad Air, so keep that in mind. Surprisingly, from a starting price standpoint, we are still staying at $599 for the iPad Air 11-inch and then $799 for the iPad Air 13-inch with a starting storage of 128 gigs as opposed to 64 gigs. So at least Apple did increase the storage size of the iPad Airs because 64 gigs in 2024 was nowhere near enough anymore, so 128 gigs should be enough for about 90% of users. The iPad Airs will come in 4 different colors. You have Space Black and Starlight, which are 2 colors that we're very familiar with, but then we're getting 2 new hues. We're getting a new purple hue as well as a new blue hue. We did order a blue one, so I kind of want to see how blue it actually is. In years past, the actual colors that you pick up are really not that vibrant, and depending on how the light hits it, it just kind of looks either silver or gray. So let's see what the blue colorway looks like when we get it in our hands on May 15th. So aside from the new size of the 13-inch iPad Air, some other things that we did get with this new update is that we now have the M2 chip built in there, so obviously that means it's going to be a faster chipset, it's going to be better with performance, with GPU, with CPU, and since it does have the M2, it now supports things like Apple Pencil 2 Hover. So being able to have the hover support, again, I didn't see too many use cases for it, but hey, at least you now know that with the M2 chip on the iPad Air, you can use the hover feature with the Apple Pencil 2. And of course, it still has the 3 pin connectors on the rear, so it still works with the 11-inch Magic Keyboard, but now, since we do have a larger 13-inch iPad Air, it will work with the larger 12.9-inch Magic Keyboard. I can see somebody upgrading from an old 12.9-inch iPad Pro from 2018 and not wanting to spend the full maybe $1,300 on the new iPad Pro, so they pick up the iPad Air in the 13-inch variant at $800, and it still works with all of the Apple Pencil 2 and Magic Keyboard accessories. Apple also finally did what we all wanted them to do, and they moved the camera from the portrait orientation over to the landscape orientation, so that is great to see. So now your Zoom calls and your FaceTimes won't look awkward when you are holding it in landscape mode, which is how most people are using the iPads nowadays, especially on the larger side. And then the final update that they did give us is that they actually increased the speaker volume as well as giving us 2x bass. So if you do want to use your iPad Air as a speaker, maybe as a Bluetooth speaker, as a smaller speaker in a smaller room, you can definitely do that. And then lastly, do keep in mind that this does not have Face ID. This is still continuing to have Touch ID that will be used on the lock button itself. So if you guys are used to Touch ID on the iPad Air, then that's going to be very familiar. But if you're coming maybe from an older iPad Pro, like a 2018 iPad Pro, just be aware that it does have Touch ID and not Face ID. So in terms of availability, pre-order, pricing, and all that good stuff, you can actually start to pre-order them today when this video is up or whenever the actual Apple event Let Loose video ended, so definitely jump on there before it starts to kind of go farther and farther in terms of delivery date. But if you order it in time, May 15th is when Apple's going to do deliveries, so about 8 days from now. But then in terms of storage sizes, they do offer 128 gigs as a starting point all the way up to 1 terabyte, which is a new form factor or a new storage factor for the iPad Airs. But do keep in mind, even though we're with the M2 chip, it still is only going to give us 8 gigs of RAM, even for the highest level of 1 terabyte, versus on the iPad Pro, it's a little bit different, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But that's everything with the iPad Air, and leave a comment down below if you guys are going to pick one up, what you're replacing it with, and what colorway you're going with. But now let's move on to the iPad Pro. But real quick, before we get into the iPad Pro, a quick word from our sponsor, Paperlike. Paperlike was one of the first iPad accessories that I'd ever tried. The moment that I got my 2018 iPad Pro, I knew I'd have to get the screen protector, and it never disappointed. So now, 5 years later, Paperlike has just released their new version 2.1, or their Swiss Paperlike. The Swiss Paperlike still uses the nanodot layer, but is now spread more evenly across the surface of that screen protector in order to further minimize refractions, which was the main complaint that I would hear, so that's been totally fixed. This also allows for a crispier and more clear visual experience. It still has that amazing Paperlike feel that we've grown to love, but now they are offering even better overall visibility and clarity during use. But they recently decided to bring their iPad accessory expertise and create a new premium folio case for the iPad Pro and iPad Air. Their new charcoal folio case aims to bring users the look and feel of your favorite notebook, but for your iPad. My favorite part is how it actually connects via magnets instead of having a shell or a case to mount it. All you do is slap your iPad on the magnets to hold it sturdily in place. As you can see, my scientific shake test lets you know just how strong those magnets are. If you're looking for a tri-fold folio case that protects your iPad, can act as a stand and a canvas, is premium and lightweight, you definitely got to give this one a try. Click the first link in the description below to check it out. It really helps support the 9 to 5 Mac channel. So thank you to Paperlike for partnering up with 9 to 5 Mac. And now, back to the video. But now let's get into the iPad Pro, which is the bread and butter and which is what I'm most excited about. So obviously we're sticking with the 11-inch and the 13-inch variant. It looks like the bezels did slim up a little bit and the design is actually much thinner. So with a 13-inch iPad Pro, it goes down to 5.1 millimeters in thickness, which is actually thinner than an iPod Nano, which is absolutely insane. Again, I'm still a little bit worried about bend gate and seeing what that's going to do from a build quality standpoint and maybe it bending a little bit, but that remains yet to be seen, and definitely we'll be looking at those kind of use cases when we do get it in the actual studio on May 15th. So when it comes to pricing, we're actually starting at $999 for the 11-inch and then $1299 for the 13-inch iPad Pro, which is a little bit of a spec increase in terms of pricing for these because they had to make room for the new iPad Air, and also you're getting a little bit more value now with increased storage at the bottom level. So the actually starts at 256 gigs of storage, no more 128 gig variant, and it goes up to 2 terabytes of storage as well. And with those variants of storage, once you hit the 1 terabyte model, it does unlock 16 gigs of RAM versus 8 gigs of RAM with the 256 and the 512 model. So keep that in mind. If you need a little bit more RAM and a little bit more storage, you're definitely going to need to go with the 1 terabyte version. And then the 1 terabyte version also unlocks the ability to get the nano textured glass. So that is another $100 upgrade. So if you do want to get a nano textured glass iPad Pro in the 13-inch variant, it's going to start at $1999 or $2,000, which is pretty absurd for an iPad Pro, but again, you know, to each their own. That's not the one that I picked up. I picked up the 512 variant for the iPad Pro in the 13-inch version. It does come in 2 different colors, in a new space black, which is the one that I went with, and then a silver color, which is tried and true. And that is the overall gist of availability and the pricing for the iPad Pros. Again, pre-order started today right after the event, and then you get the delivery starting on May 15th, depending on when you're able to get your order in, which is amazing to see. So there's a few things that Apple started to tout with the iPad Pro. First and foremost is the design. If you notice on the renders and the pictures that they were showing, the design, even though it's going to be very familiar, it did change enough where you're going to feel a little bit of a difference. So you can see with the sides and the railings that it looks a little bit more curved off, very similar to the transition that they made from the 14 Pro Max and the 15 Pro Max on the iPhone side. So definitely going to be a little bit more rounded. You're still going to have the same industrial design, but it's going to be maybe a little bit more comfortable to hold in the hand, and the extra thinness and the lightweight nature of this is going to be amazing. Now that remains yet to be seen what it's going to do to the battery life, but again, definitely subscribe to the channel and leave some comments down below of how we should test that battery life overall. But Apple is debuting their M4 chip in the new iPad Pros on both the 11 and the 13-inch, as well as a new OLED display tech, which is going to be amazing to see. So of course, it's going to be faster, it's going to be more fluid, it's going to be able to handle a lot more machine learning and AI tasks. Apple had a bunch of examples of how this is going to be used in the real world, but again, it's going to be more on the creativity side. It's going to be, maybe rendering footage and being able to mask things in real time and using the Apple Pencil and things like that. So if you're using this just for content consumption, yes, the display is going to be amazing, but outside of that, you're really not going to be using the speed and the power of the M4 chip. Some other things to take into consideration is the fact that we are now dealing with 100 nit max brightness and then up to 1600 nit max brightness with HDR content. So if you are somebody that uses their iPad Pro outside a lot, then being in direct sunlight is no longer a worry, because I know that sometimes, depending on your iPad and how bright it gets and how hot it gets, it could dim down a little bit and there's glare. So hopefully the 1600 nits of brightness on a nice large 13-inch display is going to be more than enough to be able to use this thing in direct sunlight. They are calling their new OLED display the Ultra Retina XDR. I love how Apple likes their marketing terms and their marketing moniker. It's just going to be a very crisp and very well-made display overall. And then lastly, from a visual and function standpoint, Apple now moved the actual camera over to the landscape orientation the same way that they did with the iPad Air, which is great to see. So having it in the correct spot in landscape mode, so you can actually have correct FaceTime and Zoom calls, is going to be a nice addition that we're going to have that we've been wanting, honestly, for the last 6-7 years. But alongside the iPad Pro, Apple released 2 new accessories. I'm going to call them new with quotation marks. First, we're going to start with the Magic Keyboard. The first thing I'm going to say is that I'm very surprised Apple didn't upcharge this. Apple kept it at the same exact price of $299 and $349 respectively for the 11-inch and the 13-inch iPad Pros, so kudos to Apple. They could easily charge an additional $100 for this keyboard, but again, it's supposed to be thinner, it's supposed to be lighter, to keep this whole package lightweight, because right now with the M1 and M2 iPad Pro that I have, combined with the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil, that's a pretty hefty package, to the point where my 15-inch MacBook Air is actually much lighter than that solution. So now bringing this down to an even thinner and lighter solution is going to be amazing. But the Magic Keyboard is going to have a few different changes. I thought Apple would add maybe some more USB-C ports or Thunderbolt ports, but they're keeping the same exact Thunderbolt port. They're keeping the same design. They're keeping the same double hinge design, but they are adding a function row, which is amazing to see, in smaller actual keycaps. They are increasing the size of the actual Magic Trackpad as well that's built into there, so all welcome additions to a new Magic Keyboard. And now this Magic Keyboard will only work with the M4 iPad Pro, versus the old Magic Keyboard will work with the iPad Airs. One thing to note is that the older Magic Keyboard does not seem to be compatible with the new iPad Pro. I'll definitely test it out once I get everything in the studio, but if you look at the compatibility list, it is not listed as a compatible device. So if you do want a Magic Keyboard with the new M4 iPad Pro, you got to spend $300 to $350 on a new Magic Keyboard. But then that's a great segue into the Apple Pencil Pro, which Apple just released. And again, Apple wowed us by keeping it at $129. They didn't increase the price. They could have maybe charged $179. But the things to take into account for the new Apple Pencil is that they added a new squeeze function, which is going to unlock a lot of shortcuts and tools to be able to use not only with Apple native applications, but then also third-party applications, because Apple is opening that up for third-party developers to customize those shortcuts so they can be used efficiently inside of those applications. But outside of that, it's the same exact form factor. It charges the same exact way. It has a squeeze function. They did also add Find My, and they also added a haptics vibration mode, which again, Apple's very well known to have great haptics, so having that built into the Apple Pencil could give you some new kind of use cases and some new kind of feedback when using the Apple Pencil with the actual M4 iPad Pro. But that is everything that encompasses the iPad Pro. So we have the iPad Pro in 11 and 13 inches. We got the new Magic Keyboard and the new Apple Pencil Pro. Apple also announced 2.0 versions of Final Cut Pro as well as Logic Pro. I'm going to leave Jeff to talk about those because that's kind of out of my wheelhouse, and for the most part, I stick to LumaFusion, and there's not much that's going to take me away from LumaFusion unless Final Cut Pro 2.0 ends up being kind of earth-shattering and makes it much easier for me to use. So I'll leave that over to Jeff. Definitely stay tuned for a video of him recapping all that. But that is the entire Let Loose event in a nutshell. Let me know what you guys think. iPad Air, iPad Pro, new accessories, new cross-compatibility, everything newer, everything more powerful, everything faster, with the price points really not being that astronomical. Yes, you can kind of load up an iPad Pro. If you go with a 2TB version with the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil, you're kind of nearing, and that nano textured glass, you're kind of nearing almost that $3,000 price point, which is kind of absurd, but most people won't be going that crazy with it. For me, for instance, I went with the 512 gig version, non-cellular, with the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil Pro to test it all out. So definitely stay subscribed to get those comparison videos, see if they're worth it, and see if it's actually worth upgrading, or if it's worth maybe getting an older refurbished iPad Pro for your use cases. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys made it to the end of this video, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know that you made it to the end. And leave some comments down below about what you thought about the event. Was it everything that you wanted, or were there some things that were kind of lacking? But that's going to do it. I'm very excited, and May 15th, everybody, mark your calendars. Peace.